Hey everyone, I'm working to hit 1,000 subscribers, and I need your help to get there. If you enjoy this content, please hit that subscribe button right now.
This is huge, and we need to break down exactly what the Bo Bichette signing means for the New York Mets roster moving forward because there are so many domino effects happening right now. 3 years, $126 million with opt-outs. Bo Bichette is officially a Met, and this changes everything about how this infield is going to look, not just in 2026, but potentially for years to come. So let's dive into this because there are massive questions that need answers and decisions that David Stearns is going to have to make very soon. First things first, let's talk about what we know. SNY put out a projected lineup that has Francisco Lindor at shortstop, Juan Soto hitting second, Bo Bichette batting third, Francisco Alvarez fifth. And here's where it gets interesting. Brett Baty at first base batting sixth with Jorge Polanco as the designated hitter. Marcus Semien is at second base. Carson Bench is in center field. And Tyrone Taylor rounds out the outfield. Now, that's a solid lineup on paper, but it raises so many questions about roster construction and what the Mets are actually planning to do here. Let me start with the biggest question mark on this entire roster. What happens with Brett Baty? Because right now, his future with this organization is completely up in the air. We haven't seen any reports about Baty taking reps at first base recently. The last time we saw him working out at first was last offseason during the Pete Alonso contract drama when both Baty and Mark Vientos were taking ground balls there just in case. But since the Mets signed Jorge Polanco to a 2-year deal specifically to play first base, there's been zero indication that Baty is preparing to play that position. So if Polanco is the first baseman and Bo Bichette is moving to third base, where does that leave Brett Baty? He just had the best season of his career. He hit 18 home runs, put up a 3.1 WAR, showed real improvement at the plate, and proved he can be a valuable piece on a contending team. His trade value has never been higher, and that's exactly why I think the Mets might move him. Here's the reality of the situation. The Mets have holes to fill. They need starting pitching desperately. They need outfield help. And they have one of the best farm systems in baseball with multiple players who could headline trade packages. Brett Baty is the perfect trade chip right now because he's young, he's controllable, he's coming off a strong season, and teams around the league are always looking for quality infielders. The Mets could absolutely use him as the centerpiece of a deal that brings back a frontline starter or an impact outfielder. Think about the possibilities here. The Red Sox need a third baseman, and they have outfield depth. A package built around Brett Baty and David Peterson could potentially get you Jarren Duran, a Gold Glove outfielder who would immediately upgrade the defense. The Guardians have Stephen Kwan, an elite contact hitter who could slot into left field and provide exactly the kind of on-base ability this lineup needs. The White Sox have Luis Robert Jr., who, despite his injury concerns, is still an elite talent when healthy. And then there's the biggest fish of all, Freddie Peralta from the Brewers. If the Mets want to go get a true number 2 starter to pair with whoever they view as their ace, Baty could be the main piece going back to Milwaukee. The question is whether David Stearns values Baty's potential more than the immediate upgrade those other players would provide. And I think that's a legitimate debate. On one hand, Baty is 25 years old and just showed real growth at the plate. He could continue developing and become a core piece of this roster for the next 5 to 7 years. On the other hand, the Mets have depth at the infield positions. They have Luis Severino, they have Ronnie Mauricio as insurance at third base, and they have Jacob Reimer, who's only 21 years old and is already showing promise in Double-A as a potential third baseman of the future. So if you trade Baty now, while his value is at its peak, you're not completely screwing yourself long-term because you have other options. Reimer could be major league ready by 2027. Mauricio can provide veteran depth. And if Bo Bichette opts out after this season or next, which he almost certainly will unless he has a terrible year, the Mets can address third base in free agency down the road. There's a certain superstar third baseman in Cleveland who will be a free agent in a couple of years, and maybe that's part of the long-term plan here. I'm not saying it is, but it's worth thinking about. Now let's talk about the Bo Bichette contract itself, because the structure of this deal is actually really smart for both sides. Bichette is 27 years old and will turn 28 very soon. He's looking for a long-term deal, but teams weren't willing to give him the 7 or 8 years he wanted. So instead, he takes this 3-year prove-it contract at $42 million per year with opt-outs after year 1 and year 2. If he has a great season, he can opt out and get that long-term deal he's been chasing. If he struggles or gets hurt, he's still making elite money for 3 years. And here's the kicker. Reports are floating around that the Phillies were willing to offer somewhere in the range of 7 years and $200 million before the Mets swooped in with this shorter, higher average annual value deal. That tells you two things. One, the Mets outmaneuvered a division rival and took away one of their top targets. And two, Bichette believes he's going to have a monster season and hit free agency again at age 29 to get that massive long-term contract. From the Mets' perspective, this is actually brilliant. They get an elite contact hitter who rarely strikes out, drives in runs in clutch situations, and provides right-handed balance to a lineup that desperately needed it. And if he opts out, they're not stuck paying him into his mid-30s when decline becomes inevitable. This is exactly the kind of short-term, high-value deal that contending teams should be making. But back to the roster construction issues, because there are legitimate questions here. Bo Bichette has never played third base in his professional career. Not one inning. He's been a shortstop his entire life. And he moved to second base briefly in the World Series when he was hurt. So asking him to learn a completely new position is a risk. Can he do it? Probably. He's athletic enough, and he proved in the World Series that he can adapt. But it's not a guarantee. And that brings us back to Brett Baty. If Bichette struggles at third, do the Mets have a backup plan? Ronnie Mauricio can play third. Luis Severino can play third. Jacob Reimer is in the pipeline. So yes, they have insurance. But if you trade Baty and Bichette can't handle third base defensively, you're putting yourself in a tough spot. The other player who doesn't have a clear role anymore is Mark Vientos. Where does he fit on this roster? He's not playing third base with Bichette there. He's not playing first base with Polano there. He's a designated hitter only, and even that spot is crowded with Polano likely getting DH reps when he's not at first. So what do you do with Vientos? You trade him. And the good news is that even after a down year, Vientos still has value. There are teams out there who will give him an everyday opportunity, and the Mets should capitalize on that while they can. So here's what I think happens. The Mets trade Brett Baty in a package for either a frontline starter or an impact outfielder. Freddie Peralta makes the most sense if the Brewers are willing to move him. A package of Baty, Tarek Skubal, and maybe another mid-level prospect could get it done. If the Mets want to address the outfield instead, Jarren Duran or Steven Kwan become realistic targets with Baty as the centerpiece. Mark Vientos gets moved in a separate deal for a lesser piece, maybe a back-end starter or a depth outfielder. The Mets then sign Cody Bellinger to play left field and provide that right-handed power bat they've been looking for. And if they really want to go all in, they sign Framber Valdez to anchor the rotation. That would give you a lineup of Lindor, Soto, Bichette, Polano, and Bellinger with a rotation led by Valdez and potentially Peralta if they pull off that trade. That's a playoff roster. That's a team that can compete with the Dodgers and Phillies. And it's a roster built around the right mix of young talent and proven veterans. But here's the thing. None of this happens if David Stearns doesn't get aggressive. The Mets cannot go into the season with this roster as currently constructed. Carson Bench is a nice prospect, but asking him to be your starting center fielder on opening day is a huge risk. Tyrone Taylor is a fine fourth outfielder, but he's not an everyday player. The rotation is filled with question marks outside of Kodai Senga when healthy. So Stearns has to make moves. He has to use the assets he has. And Brett Baty is the biggest trade chip available. Look, I understand that some fans are attached to Baty. I get it. He's homegrown. He showed real improvement last year. And there's always the fear that you trade him and he turns into a star somewhere else. But championship teams make tough decisions. They maximize value when it's at its peak. And right now, Brett Baty's value is as high as it's ever going to be. If trading him brings back Freddie Peralta or Jarren Duran or another impact player that pushes this team over the top, you have to do it. The Mets have depth in the farm system. They have Jacob Reimer coming. They have Ronnie Mauricio as insurance. They have other infield prospects who can fill in if needed. So trading Batty doesn't cripple the organization long term. It makes them better right now when they have Juan Soto and Francisco Lindor in their primes. So here's what I want to know from you. Do you trade Brett Batty or do you keep him? And if you trade him, what's the package you're looking for? Are you going after Freddie Peralta? Are you targeting an outfielder like Jarren Duran or Stephen Kwan? Or are you holding on to Batty and betting that he continues developing into a core piece of this roster? Let me know in the comments, because this is the biggest decision the Mets have to make this offseason outside of adding starting pitching. Bo Bichette makes this lineup better immediately. There's no question about that. But the ripple effects of his signing are going to determine what this roster looks like on opening day. And if David Stearns plays his cards right, the Mets could still salvage this offseason and put together a team that can compete for a championship, but the clock is ticking. Pitchers and catchers report in about a month, and the Mets still have major holes to fill. So let's see if Stearns has the guts to make the big moves this team desperately needs.